These fires are really suspicious. There's so many of them, and they all happen at the same time. And so I'm really thinking of arson. And, they want to reduce the human population, too, to a manageable level. Well, that means most of us have got to go. I'm sorry. Yeah, I would think it comes down to human freedom, how people view it. There's, the elites on the top, they just see the rest of the human race as cattle to be managed and used and whatever as a resource. And, this has happened before. There's always somebody trying to take over the world, some elite group, and this is just the latest incarnation of that. I don't think it's going to succeed as it hasn't succeeded before. I mean, the British almost pulled it off, but, I don't think it's going to work. It's kind of, because, when you wake up and you discover, everything you were taught in school was basically BS, and then you have to relearn the reality, that's pretty traumatic.
Get this vital 30-page ebook from Drs. Ryan Wolfert and Isaac Jones, How to Avoid and Heal the Toxic Brain, and learn proven, natural solutions to overcoming brain diseases and disorders. The first step toward healing and preventing brain disorders is to understand where you're encountering toxins. Identifying and eliminating them is essential to healing and reversing brain diseases. This 30-page ebook will walk you through your kitchen and all the various ways it can hurt you and how to protect yourself. Plus, it will provide you with a list of 8 superfoods to help you become superhuman. And be sure to join us on December 3rd for the start of the free online Superhuman Brain Masterclass. Over 30 experts gather to provide you with proven solutions to heal and upgrade your brain to high performance for life. Click the link below to get immediate access to the 30-page ebook, How to Avoid and Heal the Toxic Brain. And get started on better health today.
Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall. I have Ken the scientist back, and we are going to talk about some interesting things. NASA purchased some C60 manufacturing plants, and so we're going to talk about that, and that it's a big deal that they're really taking it seriously now. We think they're using it for their astronauts and for different purposes. And then we're going to talk about different ways that you can read the brain as far as people who are in extreme thoughts, whether you're in extreme on the left or right, or you have some cult following and you more have a slave mentality. All that stuff shows up in your brainwaves and brain patterns. And so we're talking about that as well. Really cool information. We also talk about how psychopaths, you can see it in brain patterns. We have the ability to do a lot of stuff now with brainwaves and being able to make a healthy society with technology. We just haven't done it. And so hopefully some of these things will come forward in a positive way, because we talk about Agenda 30, Agenda 21, Agenda 30 in the California fires, and how it sounds so nice and so good. But if you have nefarious people and people that don't have good plans, you're going to have some bad stuff. But if you have people that want good things and you organize a government and different societies in a way that's for the best for the people, these things could be great. And the same with technology. So we talk about that. Very interesting. And then he sticks around for my Patrons, and he talks about the space program. His father was the boss of Wernher von Braun when he came over. Really interesting. So Ken has a lot of inside sources into the space program and people who we've talked to over the years, and has some really interesting information he's going to share about the space program that people don't know about. So that's for my patrons. He also has a coupon to be able to buy C60 at a discount as well, and that's for my patrons as well. And I think I have a coupon code for people as well. I'll have that all below for people that are looking for C60 Purple Power. Great stuff. But anyways, let's get into my interview now with Ken the scientist. Hi, Ken. Welcome back to the program.
Good to be here. Glad to see you and your listeners.
I'm glad that you're back, because I want to put the whole science perspective on some of these things that are going on. Let's start with the California fires, because there is a lot of weird anomalies. We know that fires occur out there, and that and a lot of it is because of their mismanagement, because they don't clear out brush, and so it's like kindling just sitting there. But this is the worst it's ever been. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, part of it is, well, yes, they haven't taken care of the forest. They did that in Arizona, where I grew up. They used to have a program where they do periodic burns of the forests. and it would clear out the underbrush. This is Ponderosa pine forest. And so when there was a fire, it wouldn't be a huge thing. And so fuels have built up. And just to bring in my dad and, well, actually my family grew up in Paradise, California. In fact, they owned the town at one time, and its actual name was Pair of Dice. Later, they changed it to Paradise, California. So they were some of like the original people in there, and they sold their stuff out in the 60s. I think my grandparents did, but I'm sure it's all gone. Whatever was left there, it's all gone because it was wooden houses. So that's kind of sad. Yeah. A little bit of family history just got smoked.
So your family owned the town at one point?
Yeah, it was actually the original town was a mining camp for placer mining, and the name of the place was basically just some saloons and maybe whorehouses and a couple of hotels, and it was called Pair of Dice. And then later they had the property of that, and then my grandfather, it was during the Depression days, my grandfather had like a couple acres of sweet clover, and he raised bees and chickens, eggs during the Depression. That's how they kind of made a living in a farm up there. But yeah, and so that was the town. My dad and his kids, dad and brothers and sisters, they actually went, when they tore down the saloon to make the barn, they went underneath the dirt right below the saloon, and they got like all this gold out of it that had fallen through the cracks in the boards and stuff. So that was kind of fun. That history's all gone now, but I mean, I think part of this, these fires are really suspicious. There's so many of them, and they all happen at the same time. And so I'm really thinking of arson. This happened in Australia, and it became a real problem. It's, before there was, when the winds came down, the adiabatic winds, they call them the Santa Anas in California, and they heat up, there was, people were concerned, but they started this kind of arson group people. And they would go out and light fires, and then they would brag about what they did on the dark web, where other like arsonists do. And so now, when these fires start, the Australians arrest like 24 people when the winds come in, because there's just like this whole movement where people go out to start fires, and then, brag with each other on their darknet sites on what their fires that they did. So when I see, the winds come and then all these fires break out, I'm thinking, it's like a social phenomena, almost disease that started in Australia. And now I think it's starting to come over here to the States, where, there's a certain percentage of the population is just whacked out, and more and more so.
Yeah, we know that's true, where we do have a certain part of the population. Now, what about the lasers? Because we know that the microwave beams and lasers can start fires. We know that. We've all seen it in our own microwave oven, right? So we know that microwaves can start fires, and there has been, it's so hard with videos because everything can be doctored, and we're really good at that too. But it can happen. So, and was some evidence before of how the burn patterns were, that it looks like it could be some laser, from the last fire. But this one, people actually have videos out there. What do you think about that?
Well, the thing is, I've worked with lasers, a lot of different types, and if you're actually going to start a fire, you'd be using an infrared laser, which is, it isn't visible. It's in the infrared, the heat bands. And so you can start fires with an infrared laser, and you can't visibly see it. So like when people say a blue laser or something, I have doubts on that, because a blue laser is light, right? It's not really going to start a fire. It could be super powerful and maybe start it, but if you really wanted to start a fire, you would use an infrared laser, which is invisible to people. You can't see it. So it would be pointless to look for it, because unless you had infrared cameras, you couldn't pick it up.
So what we're seeing in those videos probably isn't real, because that doesn't make sense. I mean, the actual videos don't make sense. Not that it didn't happen with something, but those videos probably aren't the real deal.
Yeah, because if you're going to do that, you could just use a laser that's invisible. Nobody could see it. And so, they have all the money and time they want. If they're going to do that, they would just do that. I mean, that's just the way it would be. So I just can't imagine they'd use visible lasers. That's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. And what do you think about the kindling? The fact that California is they want to keep their stuff, for nature, but all they're doing in the end is destroying nature in mass amounts, because they're not, keeping it clean.
Yeah. And part of that is, like the Indians or Amerids, whatever you want to call them, they used to do periodic fires in their environment, because that would clear out the brush, clear out like a lot of the dead things, And then so you could get new brush, new sprouts, and new grass to grow, which would encourage the animals that they hunted. So like they managed the forest pretty intensively to maximize the food, the amount of food that they could harvest. And it's a traditions that developed, no doubt, over thousands of years. And the Australian Aborigines did the same thing. But when other people moved in and took over, they just thought fire is bad. Fire is bad. We can't have any of it. And so they suppressed it. And then all these fuels built up. So then when there is a fire, it's all explosive and devastating.
With the world being so crazy, I have two great gift ideas to help you and your family stay safe. First, the Shockwave Torch. This tiny tool drops a 260-pound thug in 2 seconds. It packs so much power in such a small package, it's scary. Thank God it's got a safety on it. If you want to stay safe in a dangerous world, I promise the Shockwave Torch will help. Next, I want to show you the Light Defender Tactical Laser. It's a palm-sized device that drops attackers by shooting off electromagnetic radiation. It is legal in most of the U.S., but it has been banned inside 4 different states, and countries across the world have been banning it left and right. This might have something to do with the fact the military uses these devices in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other hostile zones to drop terrorists in their tracks. The U.S. Navy calls it the best emergency rescuing device, and it's so powerful it will even start fires with no matches or fuel required. Click the links below to learn more about the Shockwave Torch and the Light Defender Tactical Laser Tool. There would be great gifts for your loved ones and family to keep them safe in this crazy world.
So they're kind of clueless in the sense because the American Indians, the Native Indians, they started it on purpose because it actually caused the animals and stuff to thrive more. Mm-hmm. And now they're doing this clueless. That's our problem with so much of this stuff. It's like knowing enough to be ignorant and causing more issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have our pretense, our imaginations of knowledge that we have. When a lot of people need to look back at most of our medicines actually came off of some tropical plant or some other plant that some indigenous types have been using for years, whether it came from Europe or South America or Africa or something, and then they just take that and they synthesize it and then put it in a drug. But that's the ancient knowledge. I mean, is still the basis of so much stuff, but people just don't acknowledge that.
Well, we think that anything ancient or that was done traditionally is inferior for some reason. We need to become a little more wise. But let's talk about Agenda 30. It was Agenda 21. They didn't get it done in time, so now they're moving to Agenda 30. And there's some, people are worried about it because they think that the California stuff is related to that. They think there's a lot of things related to that. And there is evidence that we got some pretty bad guys trying to run stuff around here. So what are your thoughts of what is going on with Agenda 30 as far as it is, with maybe the fires in California?
Well, they have the whole with, Agenda 21, Agenda 30, it's the same thing. And it's all about control. I mean, there's a few people that UN is basically a controlled organization. The Anglo-Americans controlled it. In fact, the UN was originally started in San Francisco, if people don't remember that. And then they moved it to the Rockefeller Center. Rockefeller gave them the land to build it, and so that's the people really pull the strings behind it. And they really want, they want to have, the top-down world where a handful of elite run everything. And then all the rest of us, are going to obey for our own good. And that's part of the thing that they always bring it. If you can read some of the things that they do, they say all these things that they propose where, this is good, but then the actual implementation of it is, mind control, state control. And, they want to reduce the human population, too, to a manageable level. Well, that means most of us have got to go. I'm sorry. Your head's on the block, basically, in Agenda 30.
And that's what we're seeing with so much of their stuff is it sounds so good, and that's why they get away with it is because they say it straight-faced. They say it with so much, credibility. But you got to look at their actions to really know what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I would think it comes down to human freedom. How people view. There's the elites on the top. They just see the rest of the human race as cattle to be managed and used and whatever as a resource. And I mean, think about that. But that's part of our culture. When I was younger, they had employees. Then they had a personnel department. But now people have been reduced to human resources, like a brick or a piece of board or or some pile of paper for the copier. It's just a different perception of human beings, and where human freedom and individuality and choice really doesn't exist. We're going to choose for you because it's for your own good, and it's for the, quote, good of the planet. And I just don't, this has happened before. There's always somebody trying to take over the world, some elite group, and this is just the latest incarnation of that. I don't think it's going to succeed as it hasn't succeeded before. I mean, the British almost pulled it off, but, I don't think it's going to work.
Well, and when the Bolsheviks went into Russia, Soviet Union, they killed over 100 million people. I mean, this becomes a pretty serious deal when you get some lunatics that want to create a global agenda and have goals in mind that are a little off-center mentally.
Yeah, some people are more equal than others. And that's the whole thing. They just, some people have I think it has to do with a moral self-righteousness. They have this they don't have really facts or truths. Facts don't matter, but they have a moral self-righteousness because of their cause or whatever ideology. Oh, we're in the Bolsheviks, we're going to help the proletariat, the working man. But, they slaughtered more proletariats and peasants than any of the Christian capitalists ever did. So, but it's more of like a moral self-righteousness that gives them the right to tell other people what to do and how to do it because, their whatever, their God, their ideology, their whatever is superior to yours. And, so that gives them the moral authority to do whatever they want.
Well, it was like Queen Mary with the Catholics. She came in and killed everybody she could find that wasn't Catholic. But we need to love each other. You know what I mean? Once we get rid of all the people who are not Catholics, now let's be loving and care for each other.
Yes, it's kind of like that, but it's all but you'll see all of that doesn't come from like an individual sovereign perspective of a person. It comes from some higher authority. It's, it's always the Communist Manifesto or the party or the proletariat or, the church or whichever church you practically belong to. It's all from a higher authority, which then gives you the authority to do that. It doesn't really ever spring from the self-authority where I'm going to do this because it's what I want. I'm doing it because of whatever, that higher authority. And so I think it's that kind of slave mind projection, the master thinking, that does that. And you can actually see this in brain scans. I don't know if people are aware of that like really hardcore liberals or Christian fundamentalists, or probably hardcore ones, or any fundamentalists really, they have, in a normal brain, when a person's, like they've never found this phenomena, by the way, in a natural population, whether it's North Sea fishermen or reindeer herders or some people living in the jungle somewhere, you don't see this. And what happens normally in a normal human, your brain, when you're just everything's fine, your amygdalas, which are on the side of your brain, take the energy from your brainstem, they just click forward into your frontal lobes. And so you're fully awake, fully functional, fully aware. And then if something, let's say a tiger jumps out or some stressful thing, your amygdalas click back to the fight or flight response, which is a whole bunch of different things in your brain. Well, that doesn't happen with like hardcore fundamentalists or liberals, hardcore, snowflake liberals. What happens when the amygdalas always click it to the left insular cortex, which is part of the mammal brain, one of the emotional centers. It's kind of like, what would the master think? And then it goes to the rest of the brain. And so actually they find that the amygdalas get atrophied because all they do is one thing. They send it. They don't flip back and forth. They don't do other things. They just send it to one spot in the human brain. And also because that spot doesn't go to the frontal lobes, they have actually found their frontal lobes atrophy. They'll actually lose the capacity for higher thought because they're in this ideological generated state. I suspect if you went to Wilhelm Reich and those guys that would go down to the deeper stuff, you would call it the authoritarian personality disorder or fear-induced obedience. So it's probably somewhere, it's some brainstem damage is causing this mental situation. And it's like a bad programming into the mind, which actually damages the hardware because, the frontal lobes atrophy.
Is that why, like, slaves, when they're freed, they just go back to kind of the slave mentality? They just can't be free, a lot of them, mentally.
Yeah, because their brains have been programmed. There's been, fear-induced programming has damaged their brainstem in some way, and it just goes to, it gets stuck in this state, and it's hard to break out of that. I mean, you'd have to do something. I mean, we can tell right now with brain scans. In fact, you can probably get an app on your on your cell phone with an attachment, you can tell right away whether somebody's a normal human or like a slave mind human. It's possible. I'm sure that app will be out sometime. But it's a state that we can recognize and deal with it. We can also recognize psychopaths too.
Well, that is really interesting. Yeah, we could recognize psychopaths. We could recognize when you don't have the healthy brain as far as being able to think independently. Now, is all this terrorist activity creating that fear-type slave mentality?
Oh, yeah, I think it is. I think, well, it's early childhood raising does it. And then it expresses itself as the person gets older. But of course, you get this wild fanaticism, whether it's, the Bolsheviks slaughtering people or, somebody strapping a bomb and blowing themselves up in a crowd or whatever. The thing is they've never found this in natural populations because let's say, there's 4 guys walking along down the trail and, a tiger jumps out. Well, the normal, let's say 3 of them are normals, they're going to click to the fight or flight response and head for the trees. And where the other one, the liberal, will it'll go to the left insular cortex and, the thought will be, how would, the master feel about me running from this tiger? Well, by then it's lunch. Because, you don't have to be the faster than tiger. You just have to be faster than the slowest guy. And so it would cut your response so that you would die in a quick crisis or have a high probability of doing that. That's why they've never found it in natural populations. They've only found it in people that live in city situations.
Where you don't encounter those situations. Give us an example of modern day society where a normal person would react to something and somebody who is become programmed to listen to a master would react.
Well, I think it's the crime. When there's if there's a shooting or some other crime situation, like a normal person would either, they'd fight or flight. They'd either attack the attacker or they'd run really fast. They'd be there. But a lot of the people, they'd sit and they hesitate. And he who hesitates is lost. And so, while the other guys get out the door, the guy that's hesitating, wondering what they should be doing, they don't make it out the door. So I think you see that.
Is it also for healthcare? Let's use a little more complicated example. Taking your healthcare into your own hands versus looking to our parents, whoever they are, the government. I wouldn't say I'm just using that as what do you call it? People think of the government as their parents almost, the authoritative figure. And so they don't take their health care into their own hands. So the people who can get past that and go, wait a minute, I got to start doing this on my own because it's not working, versus somebody who will hesitate to the point where they'll die.
Yes, and that's actually the situation because that's part of the authoritarian personality that they talk about is people when they're children are never allowed to make decisions for themselves. So when they come into adults, they always have to rely on authority figure, some pseudo-parent figure, whether it's the guy in the white medical suit with the thing or the scientist in the white lab coat or whatever it is, to make the decisions for them. And that's kind of that situation. But I mean, the powers that be kind of like slave-minded people because they'll obey and do whatever the authority tells them. They don't like the independent ones. Yeah, I mean,
perpetual childhood is essentially
exactly
what it is.
Yeah, you can't, the Indians go off the reservation when they're natural. Whereas once they've programmed them through the system, then they sit there and passively, take their oppression.
Yeah, that's too bad. Well, what about the Palestinians sitting in their little cage? I mean, they're in this, they're locked into this area. They can't get out of that walled area. They won't even let them surf. There used to be tunnels that they blocked off. They just can't get out of that, area. What does that do to them mentally? Oh,
it's terrible. I mean, they've done Palestinian children, they've done the UN goes in there, does some psychological surveys, and 60%, they get been so traumatized, 60% of them don't even want to live. They don't want to live anymore. But then with that mentality, when they grow up to be an adult and they don't want to live, they'll strap a bomb on themselves and go blow themselves up. Yeah, because they don't want to live anyway. So blowing up some of the enemy, and even if they don't care about their own life, well then, you've just created another generation of, psycho killer terrorists because they don't care about their own life.
But you understand where it's coming from.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you don't do that to people. Mm-hmm. But now the people who are already injured, you got to deal with them. But the ones who aren't, we want to give them their freedom.
Yeah, so it's just, I mean, that's an intractable problem, and it's just going to get worse. I mean, right now, I don't know if you've heard it, but it looks like they're going to have another Gaza war. It started last night.
Yeah.
And so
it's in the middle of it.
Yeah,
but Israel went in, did a mission, screwed it up. They killed 7 Palestinians. 1 Israeli got killed, and then they turned it into this big bad Palestinians.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, they'll do that, and it'll go. I mean, this stuff has been going on for a long time, and that's what I think part of the thing is. I mean, with all the stuff, not just this stuff, but all this stuff's been going on time. But what's happening now, what's different is with the internet, people are discovering it. People are awakening to this, whether it's the pedos and the political process, or the stuff going on in Palestine, or just dozens of other things. The vaccine situation, or other medical situations, or the vote frauds, or all this other stuff. With the internet, people know about this. It's like the false flags they've been trying to do. They just can't pull those off anymore, because there's, when one of them goes on, there's 10,000 eyes going through every little point, and they're going to discover any flaws in the thing. So, some of the old political processes they used to use just aren't working anymore, for the aware and awake part of the population.
I don't believe anything anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm to the point where I believe nothing. Okay, there's another mass shooting. Okay, well, I don't know if I believe it. I don't even want to talk about it because it's so stupid. All I'm doing is helping. I mean, it's just the whole thing is irritating.
Yeah, it's like one of my friends said. He had converted to Orthodox Christianity. So he wanted, and he learned Russian because, that's what the language that they use there. So he went and he learned Russian. But, if you learn a language, you have to speak with native speakers. So he went and he used to hang out with like Russians and Ukrainians people so he could speak the language with them. And this was, he recalled to me this story. He was this one Ukrainian woman who had come over, I think in the 90s with the collapse of the Soviet Union. She, of course, she came over and she was talking to him and she said, well, the thing about America is very strange. I didn't really understand. It was like I was here 6 months before I understood that Americans actually believe what they see on TV. No European believes anything they see on TV. And so,
well, that's what it's like in Mexico and South America and stuff. People just they don't believe the government's propaganda.
Yeah, I think there's a certain level of naivete that Americans have, that they've believed, the baddie government or whatever. They're starting to realize, most of that's BS, and Americans are becoming like more of the rest of the world, where they see, they have a more cynical and realistic attitude for their government or for businesses and stuff. They say, well, they have an agenda. That's, they don't believe anymore, blindly believe and go off, to fight, make the world like World War I, make the world safe for democracy. And World War I had nothing to do with democracy. It was, just another power struggle between the great powers to control the world.
Let's go fight for freedom.
Yes, exactly. Now we're going to go fight with terrorism. But it's you can't. How can you defeat terrorism? It's like trying to defeat hate or trying to defeat anything else. That's impossible. That's not you can never do that. The war on poverty. Well, poverty is still here. It's
not the way they're doing it. I mean, we can considerably reduce it, but not the way they're doing it. I mean, they're doing it, they're exacerbating it. I mean, they're making it much worse.
Well, that's maybe the goal.
Well, yeah.
Then it gives them an excuse to go for the imperialism. I mean, people are starting to wake up. America's just another empire. I mean, there's been lots of them, and just America's just the latest one. And people are starting to wake up, getting a more realistic view of their world, and I think that's part of it. And these things have been going on, all these things that people are upset about now, they've been going on for a long time. It's just the difference is people are now aware of them and talking about them and exposing them. And that's the big difference. It looks like the world's ending or a horrible, terrible thing, but in fact, it's more like people are waking up and realizing the current situation.
And we're fixing things. I mean, I can feel it's pretty traumatic. And I'm sure for people who are just waking up now, it's really traumatic. But it's important. It's an important process to make things better. The kids that are growing up right now, I feel sorry for, because if their parents are in the middle of waking up, it's going to be pretty hard for them.
Mm-hmm. And all the things that they get away with us, like vaccines. In most countries in the rest of the world, they limit the number of vaccines because they know they cause damage. Here, it's just like, let's give more of them because we can make more money and cause more damage, which gives us more business. So it's just insane.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that point of enough people awake to control it. And so the people who are awake are just mortified because we're being forced to do something that we know is bad. and we haven't reached that threshold yet.
Well, I think it has something to do with like how people go through like death or some other big traumatic event. First there's shock, then there's anger, then there's denial, and finally then there's acceptance and then action. And so a lot of people are in the lower stages, and eventually they'll move through that, the shock, the anger, the denial, the acceptance, and then finally they'll do action on it. So depending on what state you're in, it's kind of, because, when you wake up and you discover, everything you were taught in school was basically BS, and then you have to relearn the reality, that's pretty traumatic.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of trauma going on. For the kids that just learn it in the first place, then it's not traumatic, because then they just accept it and want to change things. So that's a positive for the kids that are raised with people who are kind of awake. But it's a difficult process. We'll see. We'll see kind of over the next 10 years. I've had a lot of people tell me that they've grown up. I have people in their 50s telling me they've grown up in the last decade. They feel like they were a child for 40 years.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think their Agenda 2030 is going to succeed any more than their Agenda 21 did. Maybe they'll come up with Agenda 2040 or something. Just imagining that they're going to have this one world system where they're the masters and everybody else is their slaves. It's not going to work out that way. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's not going to be that. I can tell them that.
Yeah, because people are going to, no. Well, let's talk about some weird things that happened in the C60 market. NASA. What's going on with NASA and C60?
Well, some of, NASA didn't really know much about C60, and actually some of the C60 producers had something to do with informing them, but NASA has discovered the value of C60. So pretty much they've been buying out some of the producers. They just, some of the producers where people could get their C60 from, they just don't sell to people anymore. They got one of those offers you can't refuse from the government, and so now all their production goes to NASA and others. And I know a couple companies like that. And then there was, but some of the other companies like SES, they had like a big they had to rebuild out their plant, the expansion and stuff. So they were down for a bit. Now they're coming back online. And so you can get some 99.99% C60, raw C60 in small batches from SES. And I hear in a couple of months they'll be fully built out on their facility and it'll be available again in good sizes. But the other companies, just a lot of them just got gobbled up by, the government. And so because the government's discovering it. And I suspect, one of the things about C60 is it's extremely radioactive protectant. They did the studies where, rats get C60s, the other ones don't. They hit them with a deadly dose of radiation. All the ones that did get C60 died. None of the C60 rats died. They don't even appear to get sick. So, when you're in space as an astronaut up there above the Earth's protective atmosphere, even though the Van Allen belts protect you to a certain extent from, radiations, there's a lot coming in. And so you get a significant radiation dose. So if you have your astronauts on C60, and it'll protect them against that radiation damage. And so that's probably what they're doing. They're doing a test, obviously, of some sort of scientific test. And those tests usually take probably a year, 6 months to a year, sometimes longer. So they're buying it in bulk quantities, kilogram after kilogram. So the tests are going on.
Why do they need that much?
Well, maybe they're siphoning some of it off to the people in the secret space program. I don't know.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, and long term, you might have a little hiccup here, but what's going to happen is more suppliers and manufacturers are going to pop up.
Oh yeah, it's supply and demand. Right now, supplies are tight, prices are high. As now more people will probably get into the production of C60, and then there'll be more 60 available, and prices will drop. I mean, it's just the economic law. I'm sure it's going to happen, but the thing is, it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, setting up a laboratory to produce something like C60, it's not an easy thing to do, nor is it an easy thing to purify it once you've made it. So, I mean, you have to, recognize that fact. And so this is one of those things you're seeing in marketing. But I'm sure if we talk a year or two from now, there'll be a whole lot more C60 producers, and more people will be, and prices will probably have dropped by then.
Yeah, essentially when something like this happens, all it does is promote. It's part of the growth process.
Yes. And it's not like a crisis thing. But it's just, but people are, as in demand too, as people, I mean, most people don't even know about C60.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
when they find out the NASA scientists or NASA astronauts are taking C60, well then, and it's protecting them against, radiation and toxic materials, then yeah, they're going to want some. So that'll go out to the major public, which of course will increase demand. And yeah, it's just part of an economic process.
Well,
So,
yeah. And it's the good part is they're not buying it to shelf it. Otherwise, they'd be buying everything up and then make it totally on it. But that's not what they're doing. So it's just part of the growth process, which is a good thing.
Yes, it is. And so yeah, they're buying it to use it because they're probably using it themselves too. There's probably a lot of that.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah,
oh,
I'm sure.
That's all the NASA administrators. Well, we'll take our daily C60 dose because and we'll be part of the test too. Because it's such a health benefit to people. I mean, it just transforms people's lives. I mean, chronic health problems people have had their whole life or for decades goes away in really a short period of time. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, but mostly it's antioxidant potential. But we've been discovering some other crazy things about C60 and its chemical actions. It's not like, it's got unique things. C60 has some more unique things we keep discovering all the time.
Well, you discovered something about the telomeres because there's this question on what does it do with the telomeres? Does it lengthen them? Does it not? What's really going on there? And you've kind of come to some conclusions now.
Yeah. Well, I'm not the only one that's doing this. There's actually several of the C60 producers we've been, communicating behind the scenes and trying to figure out what's going on and working scientifically. Because most of us are scientists. And one of the things, it was a mystery because people that have been taking C60 for like 2 or 3 years, they go take a telomere test. And they come back, in their mid-50s, that's what most of us are, or early 60s, and they come back with a telomere length more characteristic of somebody in their mid-30s. So and when you do a telomere test, they rub cells out of your mouth or get a blood test or whatever. So they're taking, it's an average of a whole lot of cells, not just one cell. So the average telomere length was significantly lengthening in people that were taking C60. And how can this happen? Because normally, just a little bit for your listeners, a short thing on telomeres. Telomeres are like nucleotide sequences. They're like little strings that wrap around the end of the chromosomes. So the chromosomes don't unravel and they don't stick to the ends of other chromosomes. But every time your cell divides, a little bit of the telomeres disappears. So your cell has on average about 50 divisions before it can't divide anymore. And that's when it becomes a senescent cell. And it can't function anymore. And so we were wondering, how is this happening? How can C60 increase telomeres? Because there's really nothing in mammals that will lengthen telomeres once they've been reduced. And we found out that's not what was happening. What was happening is 2 things. First off, C60 stimulates the mitochondria inside of a cell. It replaces SOD, which is a superoxygen demutase, which gets rid of superoxygen, neutralizes it. And when cells get senescent or down toward the end, they don't really want to die. They kind of just slow down. They change the acidity, make themselves more acidic inside. They slow down their metabolism. And so, but that's the cell nuclear DNA. The mitochondria have their own DNA and their own agenda because they're part of a collective. And so when C60 gets in there, it restarts the mitochondria, which have been suppressed by the cell. And the mitochondria will send out, they have their own DNA, and they'll send out messages to the cellular DNA saying what's going on, what should be doing, blah, blah, blah. And then the cellular DNA has to send back messages to the mitochondria. Well, if the mitochondria don't get the messages at the speed they need or the right messages, they will actually cause apoptosis, which is or programmed cell death. And when a cell goes through apoptosis, it basically breaks down into little garbage bags, which then phagocytes, can take out. So it's a non-inflammatory process. So what's happening, appears to be happening, is C60 gets in there, all these senescent cells, sleeping cells, lazy cells, they self-terminate. And those are the ones that have the shortest telomeres. And then, because C60 also helps signal clarity and communication molecules between it, the organ or the tissue, which has all the cells going away, will send out chemical signals to the stem cells in the area saying, we need stem cells to replace the missing tissue. And so that's the other thing we found with people that because I was talking about this on, I have the C60 show every second and fourth Wednesday of the thing. You can tune on YouTube or Facebook Live. And I'll have one, in fact, today's Wednesday? Oh, yeah, I guess we'll have one. Tomorrow's Wednesday.
Is it Wednesday?
Yeah,
tomorrow, yes.
Yeah, tomorrow I'll have one at 7 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. But which I'll be going over that. But what they found is these people had stem cell, I think I might have talked about this before. I could say, and here's like people, once I talked about this, people communicated with me and they went in to get stem cell treatments, because the stem cell treatments, and people that have been taking C60 have incredibly high stem cells. I have one testimony here from a guy in his 70s, and he had stem cell levels like they'd expect to find in somebody in their 20s.
Wow.
So
yeah, that's incredible.
And so what's happening is so the apoptosis, the old sleeping malfunctioning cells pass away, and then the stem cells get messages to divide themselves, so they do. So the people will have huge levels of stem cells, and then some of those stem cells will turn into a specific organ or tissue type, but they're like little baby cells. They have a full set of telomeres. And for the first few cycles of life, so you got one stem cell. Well, that one stem cell is going to turn into two stem cells, or it's going to turn into a tissue type, but that's like a baby tissue type. So it'll go, two tissue types, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256. So one stem cell will actually turn into like dozens or hundreds of new cells in that tissue type or that organ, and they have a full set of telomeres. So the reason is why people's telomeres get longer is actually C60 gets rid of the old cells that have short telomeres, and then new cells, stem cells, come in, differentiate into tissue types that have like nearly their full set of telomeres. So C60 is literally actually making you younger.
It's regenerating your cells. It's what a young person does.
Mm-hmm. And exactly like that. Because a normal person maybe loses 90 to 100 billion, cells a day to apoptosis. A younger person, 20 or 30 billion cells. But when you can see C60, a whole lot more go out. I think I talked about, here, let me grab it, about this thing. There's like this peptide that they had that kind of stimulates that too. It was on that, I think I've talked to thing. It's before, it's like Science Daily. They have, that's a really good site. Peptide targeting senescent cells restores stamina for kidney function old mice. Basically what it did is it just basically wiped out all the apoptosis cells. So all that was left was younger cells, and then the stem cells came in. But of course, they didn't have C60. So theoretically, if using technology like this, that, to do the apoptosis time with C60, and then C60 stimulates stem cells, and maybe new technologies that can stimulate stem cell division as well, people will, I think right now 120-year lifespans are achievable with technology like this and C60. And there's some other technologies, which I'm actually involved in too, that stimulate stem cell growth. We've actually have devices that do that. It works with fungi and plants and maybe small invertebrates, but it doesn't work with people yet. But yeah, we're there. It's happening.
I know it is really cool.
Yeah, and that's a technology. It hasn't been released yet, but yeah, there's another technology that stimulates stem cell division and thing in general. So yeah, people are looking for at least 120 years, maybe 200 years now, for extended life.
The nice part is living healthy, feeling good, living to 150, not just getting old and frail and feeling like crap for 30 years. We're actually going to feel good living that long, because that's the difference. It's like not just living long, but actually feeling good living long.
No, you'll be young a long time.
Yes.
Biologically, you'll be, 40 years old, but chronologically, you'll be 100 years old. And this stuff is here. Obviously the elites are using it and stuff, but I'm going to say something first though, because the elites are using it, but they aren't using it yet we're still seeing a lot of people getting old and really ratchet. You know what I mean? I shouldn't say ratchet. Yeah. That's not the right word, because I don't mean it like that, but they just don't feel good. They don't look good. They're getting old. And when we start seeing older people in their 90s looking like they're 50, that's when, and we are seeing a little bit of that with celebrities and stuff. But when we really start seeing that, that's when we know people are using it. Yes, and I think I think a lot of the elites, they're so in their little box of wealth.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And so that they don't have, there's no connection. It's same with Trump and some of these other politicians. They're isolated in a box, and all they have is the people around them who serve them to give them the information. So they're not really out on the internet wandering around doing things. They're so busy managing their wealth and their empires. they don't have time to learn new things, so they're kind of losing out on that section. And eventually that works through, but it takes a while.
Well, where can they?
George Soros doesn't have C60.
Oh God! Let's keep it out of his hands and some of the other creeps that are out there. Well, where can people learn more about you? You said you had a YouTube video. You had, I mean, you're on my show. Everybody knows on a regular basis, but you have a show that goes on what, once a week or twice a week?
It's twice a month. Twice a month.
Twice a month.
The
okay.
second and fourth Wednesday of the month at 7 o'clock. It's on. We have it live on YouTube and Facebook and a couple other things, MeWe and a couple other places you can tune in and see
Excellent.
it. But we also post it on. It's also posted on YouTube. And,
okay. And what's your?
So you can just go back. It's called the C60 Show.
Okay. And what's your website?
Well, the C60PurplePower.com, and then there's a C60 support group, which is we're associated with, and we'll post stuff on that one, so that people can go on a Facebook. So that's a C60 support group on Facebook, which you can go and it'll have the latest stuff. So you can link to any of the shows too if you want to go in there. A lot of other people do it. It's just like a forum for a lot of people to put their C60 experiences and stuff and share information. Because a lot of the stuff we're learning about C60 is, we get it after I mentioned the telomere lengthening. Then I got reports from people coming back to me saying, "Whoa, I have these incredibly high stem cell counts," and that allowed us to put two together. And it's not just me. I mean, we have a lot of the producers talk to each other behind the scenes, so we can all learn. So everybody learns together to make a better product. And
you know what's so cool is your company. Cliff was on my show, talked about you, Purple Power. And we talked about C60, and that's what launched. The industry was going in a small level, but that's what really launched the industry. You sold out, and it was so cool. And then you came onto my show, and then everybody started really getting in it. They were doing it before, but it wasn't until that show where we talked about C60, and then he mentioned you and your company. That was cool.
Yeah, because
we're kind of the beginning of it.
Yeah, you and Cliff basically 100th monkeyed C60 into the awareness of the alternative community. But it's still there. I mean, we can go even in sometimes I go into Boulder and, that's supposed to be like a progressive thing, but, not 1 out of 100 people know about C60. So there's going to be another step somewhere here in the next year or two where it's going to go from just the small alternative community, which is the people listening to you and who are using it and stuff because they know it's fantastic benefits, to the public in general. And I think probably the NASA research will have something to do with that.
Absolutely.
But you're not going to see that for a year or at least because, I do research stuff. And, you got to do all the research, then you got to do the processing. And so it could take 2 years to get out. But it will get out, and probably there'll be a few leaking of it. But that's
it's too cool. And they're realizing it's holy crap. Okay, Ken, will you stay after for my Patrons?
Certainly will.
Okay. Thank you so much.